With bleeding, it's important to remember that blood actually carries oxygen to the body, which allows it to get a lot of the treatments that it needs when it's trying to heal itself. So if you're getting oxygen to various parts of the body and that suddenly gets cut off, you can see why you would obviously have a very rapidly progressing life-threatening situation. So how do we control bleeding? Well, there's a few ways, but usually the best way to control bleeding is through applying direct pressure. Now, what do we mean applying direct pressure? Well, let's say that I have a wound on my forearm again that's bleeding. One of the things I could do is I could take something and I could put it over top of that wound and press down on it. Now, what objects could I use to press down on a wound that was bleeding? Well, I could use just about anything, right? I mean, I could use my shirt, I could tear it up. I could use my jeans, I could tear them up. But ideally, what I would want to use is some sort of a clean gauze. And I would want to put that directly over the wound and put direct pressure on the wound to try to stop the bleeding. Now, another thing to remember, if you don't have access to anything to put on there, you can use your bare hand. You can put your bare hand on something to control the bleeding if it's a worst case scenario and an emergency. But let's say we've put the gauze on, we've put the direct pressure on, and now the wound is continuing to bleed. It's a pretty serious wound. It continues to bleed right through the gauze. It's not stopping. What do we do? Well, some people would be tempted to yank that gauze off and put a fresh piece on, right? But that's not the right answer. The right answer is to leave that gauze in place and put a fresh piece on top. And the reason for that is because if you start to take off the original bandage or whatever you had on there to stop or slow the bleeding, you're ruining the coagulating effects that were already taking place from the blood. In other words, it's not going to be able to clot properly. And so you've just basically created a fresh wound again. So you're going to be in this cycle of fresh wounds as you take off and put on, take off and put on. So instead, what you should do is put on the gauze or whatever other object you use, put it on over top. If it continues to bleed through, grab another fresh piece of something, put it on top. Grab another fresh piece, put it on top, another, put it on top, and just keep adding layers to stop the bleeding.